What's going on, guys? Student Dr. Shaq here. Welcome back to another video. I'm going to be reacting to the pre-med Reddit page and sort of comment on the findings that I see, some of the comments that are there, and just give my 2 cents. Let's see what y'all are saying. Let's see what the buzz is about med school. Let's get right into this, but first, if you're new, definitely consider subscribing. Okay, so I kind of started to click on pre-med Reddit, see what we have here. To all my future MDs, you're going to finally understand what it feels like to be average. Everyone accepted into a USMD program, most of you will finally understand what it's like to be average. You will understand what it's like to be unable to score in the top 20% of your class, no matter how hard you try. I mean, in undergrad, I was not the top 20%. It took a while for me to kind of figure out how to properly prepare for pre-med undergraduate classes. And I actually struggled a lot in my first couple of years of undergrad. So I already kind of knew what it feels like to be average. You'll understand what it's like to feel underprepared for a test, to think you didn't ace it, get your grade back, and realize you were right to feel that way. I feel like it's like a chronic thing, no matter where you are, so I agree with that statement. I will say, I know it's easier said than done, and I've fallen into this trap myself, but grades aren't one of many factors that contribute to your success in med school. Success being getting into residency and matching into the program that you want. So grades are just one thing. For some of you, it'll be the first time you actually fail a test or a class. Yeah, I've never failed a test or a class, but I have scored in the 70s before, which really sucked. Especially because my school's GPA based, so grades actually kind of matter. A lot of med schools, they have their grading system as pass-fail, so it's a little, I don't want to say easier, but it's a little less stressful for those academic programs. For a program that has a GPA, and if you want to do a competitive specialty, you can imagine how stressful that can be. The opposite is true as well. Most of you will not be in the bottom 5% either. This means you are likely to graduate and achieve your, yep, that's true. That's why you should enjoy the process and not let a few grades here and there just be daunting. Contribute to making the world a better place. True. That's a nice comment. I mean, it's incredibly real. I would agree with all of that. So this is great. I hate Brown Boy 621. That is all. Don't worry, I hate me too. Being a pre-med student, can't wait, get rid of the pre. You're almost there, buddy. You're almost there. I don't even tell people I feel like a band kid again. Sorry, I only respect future board certified pediatric orthopedic. Yeah, you can only, basically, if you're a pediatric surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, and a trauma surgeon, and a neurosurgeon, you're basically cracked out of your mind. You're smart as anything, you know. No one can say anything at that point. You know, that's what you all should aspire to be. I unironically hate pre-meds who hate on pre-meds more than just pre-meds. Seriously, don't hate the player, hate the game. There's a reason we're all neurotic AF. Capitalism, the competitiveness of this process because of the capitalism, and maybe because it's a very high stakes job. Someone somewhere maybe thinks that seeing it, if we break now, is a good measure of whether we'll break later. I don't know if capitalism has something to do with the competitiveness of getting into med school. I would say a lot of people are applying, and a lot of people want a great top 10 job, like top 10% job, like a very nice lifestyle. Even look at other ones. So scramble to finish 20 MD secondaries over the past month, and now anxiously wait for all those lovely med schools to consider me. AKA the kid who shows up late to climb onto the school bus to go onto a class field trip. This doesn't just go for MD schools, it's also for DO schools, but the earlier the better, because there's a lot of applications. It's harder for people to see your application if you submit later. School called about my secondary. Wow, I've never heard that before, actually. Ask if I was going to submit my secondary because they were looking forward to seeing it. What does that mean? Isn't that really, really good? On paper, this sounds good, but the type of school it is matters. If it's a for-profit DO school, new school calling to say, it could just be them having goons call to make sure that they got enough money to buy the donuts for the next AdCom meeting. If it's a reputable school that doesn't have a history of doing this, check SDN and Reddit, they might actually be interested in sending you. That's actually a really good point. There are a lot of for-profit schools that are just coming into picture. And the thing, like, I'll be honest with you, I did apply to a couple programs here and there. Biggest thing to look out for in for-profit schools is that because they're so new, they might have deficiencies in their curriculum. So, for example, one of the programs that I had, they didn't have a third-year rotation program, which if you're in med school, you know that third-year rotations are practically the most important year of the 4 years in medical school, because It showcases how you do in the clinic. It showcases how you work with doctors. The first 2 years of med school are very important too, but the third year, you kind of do everything. You're doing your step 2 prep. You're doing your research probably. You're getting a lot of experiences that you see with physicians and applying the clinical knowledge that you learned behind the textbook in the first 2 years and applying it in the clinical sense. So that's why it's really important for third year rotations to actually be there. The DO school that I applied to that was for profit didn't necessarily have that. So that was why I didn't go to that school. Oh, what does this guy say? The physician says, not a good or bad sign. They told some low-wage administration worker to go call all the people who haven't submitted secondaries yet to make sure they get their secondary fee. Oh, that's actually a more plausible reason. It's actually absurd how expensive, how much the cost of applying to medical schools goes up because of the secondary application fee. So this comment right here is actually pretty much, I feel like that's the more likely reason that you got a secondary call or whatever. Maybe I'm going to be So one thing I've noticed is that there's waves of interviews. Admissions boards, they look at applicants in waves. So very early applications to the top of the pile are usually evaluated within the first couple of weeks. They invite them for interviews. Then you have your first month of interviews, right? And then it just kind of cycles down more and more, right? So as more and more people are applying, more interviews happen. So there are waves. There's a very early interview period, August through October, or I guess August to September. And then October to December, they would have the early interviews. From there, it's the spring interviews, which is like the class size will be filled with applicants who've been accepted. I think what they would do, there's interviews for the waitlist and whether or not the applicant fits into the waitlist. So correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I feel like that's just generally how it works because it's so rolling, like the admissions process is rolling. Purgatory. Applied early in the cycle and submitted secondaries within the 2 weeks shadow, but still no interview invite. I'm trying not to overthink, but the voices, self-doubt and imposter syndrome are hitting hard. Yeah, there's more of that. I dread the thought of having to reapply. I've applied to medical school twice, so it's never over until it's over. I got my master's during one of my gap years, but chose to work as a scribe to gain more clinical experience. And now I can't help but feel I should have just started a real career. My life has become clocking into a job and drains me, and refreshing my inbox only to find rejection slowly trickling in. Meanwhile, I'm gonna click on the whole thing. Let's see. Meanwhile, friends are already medical students or moving on in the trajectory of their lives while I'm just stuck. I feel stunted. Please comment if you got an interview invite later in the cycle. Usually the biggest thing, if you feel like you're stuck, it's important to see where you're lacking. When I first applied, pretty much across the board, I was rejected everywhere. And that's because I didn't have any clinical experience. So like you, I was in a master's program at that time. I was trying to finish my classes. I got selected as a patient care tech and I worked full-time student, full-time employee. I knew that because I had a lack of clinical experiences, that's what contributed to the deficiency in my application, and that's why I got so many rejections. If you feel stuck, one of the biggest things I would say to do is figure out where you're lacking. Do you think that you didn't edit your personal statement or your work and activity sections as much? Do you think you didn't edit your secondary essays as much? Because there is an explanation to things. I don't think my personal statement was as developed the first time around compared to the second time around. I mean, you have to pinpoint where you're lacking and you have to fix that. And that's what med school admissions are looking for, because they'll see your old application too. They'll make note of it. But yeah, it's natural to feel stuck. Don't lose hope just yet. It's pretty early on. It's still October. I know it's pretty hard because you have a whole year basically to kind of just wait until you get an interview invite. That's not a fun period. All right, I'm gonna look at a couple more and then just kind of end this video. Sitting on secondaries, I know. What schools is it? Wait for right now. If you're still filling out secondaries, it's kind of late for a lot of schools. I honestly would just not really submit. I mean, you can submit more, but you have to think about the cost behind that, right? If your academics are pretty high, but you're submitting now, even with high academics, it's pretty hard for admissions teams to look at your work, right? Because it doesn't matter how high you are. It doesn't even matter if you have a 528 MCAT score or if you have a 4.0 GPA. It matters that they see that. And if you're applying now, you're kind of at the bottom of the pile or like very much lower down their list of applicants. So that's why I would argue, or I would encourage you to kind of apply next cycle if you're still considering your secondaries, just to save money and just to kind of get the most out of your application fees. Whoa, Psycho slowed down. What? I was lucky enough to receive 2 MD invites. Okay, you gotta follow this. Okay, so you got into DO school, which I'm a DO, so I'm not complaining. If you just gotta kind of figure out what DO schools you like. So I'm glad to have gotten a spot at one of my top DO schools, but feeling like time is running out on the MD side. So, okay, so this is the other thing that I wanted to talk about. Let's say you got into DO school and you were gunning for an MD school because of the whole MD is better than DO stigma, right? Which that's a whole other topic that I can talk about. I would say if you wanted to withdraw your applications just because you didn't get into an MD school, I wouldn't do that, because the DO school's admissions directors will look at why you withdrew your application. If your reason was because I didn't get into an MD school, or if they catch wind of that, it's going to be very hard to get accepted again, right? So I'll give you an example. I applied to only DO schools and I applied to the NIH for their summer program. I got into the NIH and that was great. You know, I can increase my research experiences to become more competitive, not just with the academic stats, but also with my clinical experiences. So an extra year for the possibility of being competitive for MD schools. Then I got acceptances into DO school. Think about it like this, right? If you know that withdrawing your application just to be considered an MD applicant, for the possibility of an interview invite, for the possibility of getting accepted, I feel like the risk is outweighing the benefit of withdrawing your application. I would say probably, like, if you're in a similar position, I wouldn't withdraw your applications. I would just take the best possible outcome and just roll with it. What to bring to an interview? Okay. So I'm curious to read about this. Hey all, I have my first in-person interview on Monday. I wanted to get some advice. Do I need to bring anything other than myself? I also can bring my iPad. I've taken notes on previous job interviews. I'm actually curious to see what people say, because when I was applying to medical school during COVID, all my interviews were online. So let's see what they say. Obviously bring yourself in your suit. You don't need anything else, but you could bring a small notepad and pen to write notes down. You're going to be learning about the school throughout this experience, so it's nice to jot some stuff down. Personally, I would turn off my phone entirely and leave my electronics at home. I want them to perceive you as engaged and excited to be there. From what I've seen, it's about your impression, the way you conduct yourself in front of the school, right? So everyone's watching you pretty much. Students that are not involved in your interview process, they're still looking at you and seeing how you conduct yourself, kind of showcasing the good qualities about you in a professional setting. That's kind of like the context that you have to give. That's just what I've seen as a medical student viewing pre-meds interviewing at VCOM. And if there's anything that happens where your first impression is viewed negatively in front of the faculty, especially, like, that's kind of more what to be worried about. You've prepared for your interview, you already came up with great answers that showcase who you are as a person and how you'd fit into the program as a regular student. That's what matters more, and just kind of doing it naturally and not so much monotonous, and having some kind of personality and not just words that you clearly wrote down on a piece of paper or whatever that you used to prepare. All right, so that's pretty much it. I went through a couple comments on Reddit. It's pretty interesting to see what people kind of talk about on pre-med, and I gave my 2 cents regarding that. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for your support. Leave a like if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.